Well, welcome to New Community. If this is your first time here, Ken Mitchell, our senior pastor, is not here. He's actually delivering Ethan, along with Valerie, to Spokane, to Moody. And they are going to be coming back empty nesters. So if you see a little emotional reactions from Ken or from Valerie, that's why they will be coming back. And it won't be because they have to just be with each other. It's because they're letting go of their kids. I remember when Christine and I were already empty nesters. The day we dropped off Blair in college at Multnomah was the same day my wife turned 50. And this, I don't know if I was supposed to say that. Was I supposed to say that? I'm sorry. The day we dropped off my son and the day my wife turned 40, well, it was actually the same day that we actually heard that my daughter was pregnant. So it was a very emotional day, you know. So I thought she was just emotional because she's stuck with me the entire time. But empty nesting, that's where Ken is. I'm the executive pastor at New Community. If you're new, most of you, many of you, I do know. I'm excited. You know, we just wrapped up a series called Balance, and it was all about sort of personal finances. It was all about our stuff. It's about generosity, about all these things that really spoke to us in the Bible about how we should handle our stuff and our finances and where our heart is all about. And that's all, by the way, it's all online. It's video. If you missed it, I would encourage you to take a look at that. We're also going to do a small group this October. It'll be a financial freedom small group, and that will be an opportunity for you to follow up with that. You know, we got together as a programming team, and we talked about, we've talked a lot 6 weeks about finances, and one of the things that we believe, and we were talking about, is that really to bring proper balance into our life, it's all about a relationship, and we're going to talk about that relationship, and we're going to talk about how Jesus gives us an invitation, a very personal, intimate invitation, and that's what we're going to discuss today, because really to have balance in our life, or balance in our spiritual life, balance in our personal life, that relationship is crucial above all else. And so we're going to focus in on that. It's really interesting. When you read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, what you'd find is fascinating. What I think is fascinating is Jesus really associated with people who were very, very unlike him. And those people who were very unlike Jesus really liked him. And Jesus was unlike them. They were unlike him, but he seemed to make this incredible connection with them. And it just made me think about church, about sometimes we sort of create an atmosphere, and we don't do it on purpose, sort of accident, but we create an atmosphere that church is just sort of for like church people. That when you come to church, you got to have your stuff together, right? Everybody's fine. We greet you at the front door. Everything's fine. You know, we sort of go through the motions at times. But we're going to see in Scripture, specifically, that Jesus really associated with people that were unlike him, that weren't fine. And that relationship, in fact, he talks about the reason he even came was to explain the Father. The reason that he even came to earth is to establish that personal relationship. And that's going to be our focus today, because we really believe that balance in your life can't happen. We can do even all the steps we talked about in our personal finance. True balance in our life happens when we are spiritually balanced. And the invitation that Jesus offers us is an intimate, personal invitation. In fact, if you read through the Gospels, you'll find that there's a number of different analogies that Jesus used to describe as how do we relate to God. And he says we should relate to God like we relate to our Heavenly Father. We should look to him as a father, like a father-son type of relationship, a father-daughter type of relationship, but a heavenly father-son and father-daughter relationship. Jesus talks about that relationship with himself too, that says, that relationship is like a branch and a vine, and that's something that is connected, that can't live if you disconnect it. That vine can't live without being connected to the branch. And Jesus says, I'm the branch and you're the vine. There's an intimate relationship. There's that constant flow of nutrition that we need to have, that we desire to have. And if we don't have that connection with Jesus, we don't have that connection with God, then we search somewhere else for that. Jesus also talks about that relationship in a very intimate way when he talks about a shepherd and sheep. And that he says, I am the shepherd, you are the sheep. And if one of those sheep goes astray, he'll leave all the other sheep to just go save that one sheep that has gone astray. And Jesus has focused, and that's the reason he came. And he came in a culture that was so far away from a personal relationship. He came in a culture where the Jews basically felt that you had to follow so many laws, you had to do everything perfectly right, you had to be holy, you had to be righteous, you could never, ever really get there. And that God may love you, but he may not particularly want to spend any time with you. That you got to be in the outer part of the synagogue. You got to be at the outer parts of the temple because you weren't clean enough. And Jesus comes in on the scene to present a whole different view of what a relationship with God would be. If you were a Roman, you believed that these gods were just fighting each other. If you were a Greek, you really believed in a dualistic type of God. They were happy, sad. You never knew what God was feeling. And Jesus comes in on the scene and says, I'm here to explain to you the Father. I'm here to explain that what the Father wants most with you is a personal relationship. What the Father wants most with you is that you're bringing your baggage, you're bringing everything that you have, and he wants a connection with you. And often in church, we wind up sort of accidentally delivering this message. The church is for church people. And if you're not a church person, you feel like you don't really fit. And we have to be careful of that. We're going to see in Scripture where he talks in Matthew that he just shows us that Jesus was so comfortable with people that were really unlike him. Much more comfortable than I think I would be in certain situations where we're going to see that Jesus entered, and how comfortable he was, and how people were so comfortable with him. So he extends this invitation that we're going to look at, a very personal invitation to us. And it's an invitation that if you have never made a commitment to him, maybe today is the first time. And if you have, maybe it's a time for renewing that commitment and understanding what that commitment is. And not getting confused that it's something that we can earn, not getting confused that it's something that we could figure out, and that if we're good enough that maybe we can get there. But it's this invitation, unconditional invitation to us. Because following Jesus is simple. And if it's not simple, it's because people like me and a role like this has really made it complex. And we shouldn't, because it's very simple. We're going to jump right into Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. And the story is about Matthew. It's out of the book of Matthew. Matthew wrote it, so it's all about Matthew. It's actually about Jesus, but this portion of it is about Matthew. And if you're here today and you feel like, you know what, I've got a bunch of baggage, I've got a bunch of issues in my life, I got to clean this stuff up, I don't feel real comfortable here, you need to listen up, because Matthew, and if you consider yourself a bad person, Matthew was a bad person. I mean, he recognized he was a bad person, and you're going to find out why. He recognized, people around him recognized that he was a bad person, but you need to listen to this story if you feel like you have too much baggage. You need to listen to this story if you feel like you have something that you just can't even share with anybody. That secret inside your life, whatever that might be, you need to listen, because Matthew is in that same situation. If you feel like that you can't really connect to God, that you have, you're just not really sort of where you need to be, not major issues, but just having that challenge of connecting with God, Matthew was there. If you feel like that the only way that you can really connect maybe is going through all the rituals of church, going through the do's and the don'ts, and sign up for this, don't do this, and all these different things. And if you don't do that, you don't feel like you're connecting with God, you need to listen, because Matthew totally abandoned that entire system. Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. Jesus approaches Matthew now with an invitation that's personal, extremely personal. And you're going to see that's an unconditional invitation. He says in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Now, a little bit about tax collectors, some of you might be familiar with. That what happened when Rome would come in and take over a place, they basically would sell the rights to levy taxes on the people there, as long as you gave Rome their money. So that person had to be a Roman citizen. They would go and they would buy rights to tax their province, their area. And then what that person was a chief tax gatherer. And that chief tax gatherer then would hire tax gatherers that would then collect in certain areas. They'd set up tax booths, by bridges, by roads, crossroads, different areas. About 12 different ways that they would tax people. think we've seen this. In fact, Alan, you're going to hear from here later, but it reminded me when we were in Sierra Leone one time with a van of people. We had a rope strung across the road, right, Alan? And all of a sudden, got two guys on each side of the rope, and this just dirty old rope. It wasn't anything fancy, and they just pop and they decide, okay, boom, they pop the rope up and you better stop, right? The guys are with machine guns and they're looking pretty, and they're taxing you, right? At that point, you don't go any further until you pay the taxes. Well, in this situation, this is similar to what would happen here. Is that Matthew was a tax gatherer. He was hired by a chief tax gatherer. And he would be in a booth, and he had usually sometimes they're flanked by Roman guards to make sure they can collect taxes, and anybody that would go by would have to pay their taxes. Now, tax gatherers were despised. They were a constant reminder that Israel did not have control over their own destiny. They were pulling money. They were many times surcharged. Rome didn't really look at how much they were surcharging. If you can add a bigger surcharge, the chief tax gatherer and the tax gatherers, that's fine as long as Rome gets their money. So they were despised. They were the worst of the worst. And you'll see in Scripture that they were even given a category that's separate from sinners. They'll mention sinners and tax gatherers. They were the bottom of the barrel. They were the on-purpose sinners. They were the on-purpose people that rejected everything about God. They were considered ceremoniously unclean. They couldn't enter the outer courts of the temple. And Jesus is coming up to Matthew. And you've got to believe that the disciples are with him, and they're looking at, okay, what is Jesus going to do? He's stopping at the tax gatherer's booth. Let's see what he does. And Jesus went on from there. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. And he walks up. No doubt these disciples have got to be thinking about, okay, what's going to happen here? Follow me, he told them. And Peter, I mean, if you could put yourself in this situation, you got Peter who left a pretty good fishing business, right? I think one of the elders was sharing with me, Kyle, that the interesting thing about Matthew, when he got up and followed Jesus, he left something he could never go back to. Everybody else could go back to a job, right? He couldn't go back to a job. But here's what Jesus did. He's saying, he comes up to Matthew, a very personal invitation, come follow me. Not come clean up your life. Not come make sure everything's straightened up, make sure the sin that you have, and not lay a bunch of guilt on Matthew. Here's all the bad things that you did, Matthew, and you need to fix these things. But just simply come and follow me. And Matthew had a choice at that point of what to do, to follow Jesus, to step up out of the chair, push it back, and start following Jesus. Let's see what he did. This invitation that we get is just a very personal invitation. So Jesus looks at Matthew, simply says, follow me. And this is really how it all began. This is how it began with the disciples. It's this simple, personal invitation to follow him. And many times I think we put structure around how we follow Jesus. Many times in church sometimes we'll put structure around all the things that need to happen before you follow Jesus. None of that happened here. Everything what Jesus came, he said simply, Matthew, follow me. He could have laid a guilt trip on him. He could have said, you've done all this wrong. You've betrayed your people. You've turned your back on God. Lay out the list of his sins. Fix those. He just said simply, come and follow me. See what happens in verse 9. You might think, if you think that you've done something bad, you've been trumped, actually. You've probably been trumped by Matthew. You've probably been trumped by a number of the different disciples or the stories that you read when you read the Bible. You might have been trumped by somebody sitting in your row. Look down your row. I mean, there is nothing too bad. And Ken has shared with this before, and I love what he said. He says, our bad is never too bad. And our good is never too good. We can't earn our way into a relationship with him. And we can't earn our way out of a relationship with him if we simply follow him. Let's see where he followed him to. So in Matthew, got up and he followed him. Now, if you didn't know the rest of the story, it'd be interesting to come up with a list to say, okay, where did Jesus take him? Probably Peter and John would say, I wish he took him behind the woodshed. Because they are upset. They've got to be upset about Matthew. They've got to be upset that they have left legitimate businesses, that they have given up a lot, and here's this tax gatherer that doesn't deserve to be one of the closest followers of Jesus, and he makes this offer. Or maybe we would say, he needed to take and reteach him the 10 Commandments because obviously Matthew forgot the 10 Commandments, right? So maybe we need to take him back, put him in a small group, make him confess, make him feel guilty, make him change his life. That's another place that he could have took him, right? Let's see where he took him. Verse 10, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, he went to dinner at Matthew's house. In Luke, it says that Matthew threw a party for Jesus. And guess who Matthew invited to the party? Other tax gatherers, other sinners, other people that were like him, the people that he invited to the parties in the past that loved it, that remembered maybe the first half of the party, and they were told the second half of the party was great. That's the kind of party it was. So now you have Jesus and the disciples sitting in a party full of tax gatherers through the bottom of the barrel, and you get greater than any other sinners. You got Jesus sitting there, and obviously Jesus seems to be comfortable in that environment. Jesus was drawn to people who were not like him. In fact, it's interesting because the people who tried to be most like him and sort of went overboard, the Pharisees, were the ones that Jesus was not drawn to. In fact, I think if he came down here right now, and if you felt you were a bad person, and I felt I was okay, guess what? I think he'd be dining with you, because that's who he came to be with. That's who Jesus was. And he offers this intimate invitation to Matthew, just come and follow me. And not only come and follow me, let's go to your house. Let's have dinner. Let's invite your friends to dinner. Let's commune with your people. And that's the invitation. That's who Jesus is. So he's having dinner at Matthew's house, and many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him. Now, in Matthew 9:11, when the Pharisees were the righteous people. I mean, and some Pharisees, to be fair, we sort of get down on Pharisees and Sadducees. They were really trying to sort of figure this out and connect God, from the God of the Old Testament, that they knew the Old Testament really well, to Jesus. They're just putting this together. We have great hindsight, right? We read the Bible, we've seen the Gospels, we've gone through, we know the end of the story, right? They're in the story. They're trying to figure this thing out. But they did crazy things to try to figure this thing out. They came up with over 600 plus laws on how they can grow closer to God. They had silly, silly laws. In fact, I was going to read you a couple silly laws that I found that we have right now. These are really interesting. And there's a point to this. In Iowa, it's a law that if a one-armed piano players must perform, they have to perform for free. They can't charge. That's a law on the books. In Wyoming, you can't take a picture of a rabbit during the month of June. Right? That's Wyoming, though. If you keep your donkey in a bathtub in Georgia, a law in Georgia, you might be arrested. In Harper Woods, Michigan, it's illegal to paint a sparrow and then sell it as a parakeet. In Wisconsin, there's a law that says you can't serve apple pie in public unless you have cheese with it. That's Wisconsin, right? Big cheesehead thing. It's illegal to whistle underwater in Vermont. These are honest-to-God laws that are there. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, you need a licensed engineer to open soda bottle. It's illegal for a man to knit during fishing season in New Jersey. In Hood River, hippie capital of the world, Oregon, you need a license to juggle. And in Connecticut, a pickle must bounce before it's considered a pickle. So what's the point? The point is that if left to our own devices, we can come up with some pretty silly things to do. And the Pharisees did this very same thing. They came up with silly laws, of 600 some odd laws that says, here's what it means to be close to God. You got to do this and this and this. One of the laws was you couldn't, if somebody fell, in the Sabbath said you can't work. So they had to find, what does not work? Well, you can't pick up anything. Okay, well, you can't pick up anything. Well, if someone falls and hurts themselves, right, that was considered picking up someone. They actually couldn't pick that person up on the Sabbath. So that was to be close to God and neglect your brother. Right? I mean, it just didn't make a lot of sense. But the silly laws. Another law they had was you couldn't walk over 3,000 feet, about 2/3 of a mile. And if you walked over 3,000 feet, that was considered work. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. Then they came up with the deal that said, well, if you eat at 3,000 feet, right, after 3,000 feet, and rest, then you can walk another 3,000 feet. So if they had to take a long journey on Sunday, they sent someone ahead of them to every 3,000 feet leave a meal. so they can continue through. I mean, isn't that silly? So these Pharisees were working really hard to try to figure out how to grow closer to God, how to, and Jesus comes in here and he's sort of debunking this system, right? And the Pharisees are confused. They're saying, why, Jesus, you're sitting here with a bunch of tax gatherers, you're sitting here with a bunch of sinners, they seem to be pretty comfortable with you, and you seem to be pretty comfortable with them. Why are you doing that? Why aren't you with us? Because we have 623 laws and we're trying to find them and we're trying to get really close and we're judging everybody who doesn't meet one of those laws. Shouldn't you be dining with us? And look who Jesus chooses to dine with. Someone who is very unlike him. And our challenge for ourselves is often I can get into that mode. I can get to that mode of, having my laws, my little things that I need to be doing, right? And once I do that, that I feel like I'm closer. But Jesus, boy, he was so attracted to people who were unlike him, and you're going to see why in a moment. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, they're confused, right? Why does your teacher eat with tax gatherers and sinners? Why does he do this? He goes on, and in verse 12, on hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy that needs a doctor. It is the sick. Now, Matthew could have actually been insulted by this, right? He could have heard this and said, Jesus, what do you mean? You're saying I'm sick? Are you saying my disciples, that they're sick? I mean, in Matthew's case, my friends, do you think my friends are sick? Do you think, Jesus, do you think you are better than me? He could have been insulted, but let me tell you what Jesus is saying here. He's saying that he is there for the people who in their very honest moment of their life recognize there's something missing. There's something wrong. There's something inside me. There's a secret when I look in the mirror that only I know, and I'm sick, and I need help. That's who Jesus is there for. He's there for those that think that my marriage is sick. A relationship with a child is broken. I'm sick there. A relationship with a family member. I'm sick. I'm not, my job, whatever it might be. He is there for that person who feels like something that they've done, they're not the right person, their history is not good. That's who he'll dine with. Not with somebody who feels they got their act together and everything's fine and judging everybody else. He is there for those, and that is that difference. You look at this group of Pharisees and you look at this group of tax gatherers and sinners. Who is Jesus with? He's smack dab in the middle of that. So he says, I'm here for the healthy who need a doctor. I'm not here for the healthy who need a doctor, but I'm here for the sick. In verse 13, he says, but go and learn what this means. And the Pharisees got to hate this because they loved to relish in the fact that they knew more about the Old Testament than just about anybody. They memorized the tons of portions of the Old Testament. They quoted the Old Testament to people. And here's Jesus says, go back because you missed something. Go back because you didn't hear. And he quotes out of Hosea 6:6. 6:6, he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. So Jesus is more into rescuing than he is for the routine that the Pharisees went through. He's more into forgiveness. He's more into providing mercy. He's more into providing grace than he is for sacrifice. And the Pharisees came with all their rules and their regulations in a way that they can sacrifice, whether it's on the Sabbath or whatever it was, to grow closer to God. And he's saying, you missed something. Go and look at this again. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. In verse 13, he says, for I have. Now this is, if you're going to look at Jesus' vision statement or mission statement, this is his mission statement. I have not come to call the righteous, but I've come to call the sinners. But sinners, right? I've come to not call the righteous, but sinners. And here's what you need to hear from today. And as I said, we've talked a lot about balance in our life. The biggest balance that we have is in that personal invitation of what we're going to do. How are we going to follow that invitation? I mean, you'll find that if you do, the challenge for us is if we do like Matthew every day of our life and we make that decision to follow him. And if you haven't before, you'll find your life will change drastically. Because what will happen is you'll start changing the way you view yourself, and you'll start changing the way you view other people. And you're going to change not because somebody gave you a list of 20 different things to do, but you're going to change because it started from the inside out. And that's what Jesus came to explain to us, is that we have that opportunity. And our Father desires that personal connection and that personal relationship with us. And in ministry, the challenge in ministry is we wind up seeing, unfortunately, situations where people are not following Jesus, they follow something else, and they're coming back and trying to fix things. And that happens. But we get the front row seat to see the devastation when we're pursuing power, we're pursuing riches, we're pursuing relationships, we're pursuing our lust, our desires, whatever that might be. We see the devastation when that happens. And those people, as you get through there, and that can be us, those are the people that Jesus came to say, come, follow me. That you've lost your first love, that you've lost your first direction of wanting to be with me. And it's all about that personal relationship, that personal invitation that Jesus has for us. Now, if you can imagine for a moment that if we became a church that was like Jesus, that followed Jesus, that loved Jesus, and that we loved the community around us, we loved the people around us that were completely unlike us, and that the people that were completely unlike us in this community began to like us because of treating them as Jesus treated them, being involved in their lives. I think we're doing some of that at an individual level. When we look at the ministries that are outside of New Community, we want to do even more of that. And I think as you're thinking about how would I respond, I mean, Jesus says, follow me. It may be that you make a first-time decision today, to follow Jesus, to have faith and follow him. And what does that mean? That means that what we believe is that 2,000 years ago, there's a man that walked this earth, that said he was the Son of God, that bore out that claim by his life, by his death, and by his resurrection. That's where our faith lies. Not in our circumstance. I think where we get tripped up, and where the Pharisees got tripped up, frankly, is that we look at God and we look at our faith, and our circumstance is crappy, and then excuse me for saying that if we got kids here, but our circumstances are not good, right? And the challenge for us, for our circumstances not being good, we then say our faith is not good. That if things around us aren't good, we don't have circumstantial faith. We have a faith of what was done 2,000 years ago. And we claim that promise. That's what we're holding on to. If you are a first-time decision, you've never made that decision again, I would encourage you to do as Matthew did and just step up and say, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. I believe what you've done on the cross. I believe that you died and that you rose again, and that you can give me what you promised, grace and mercy, to get through this life. And another thing you promised, there's going to be trouble. We've learned that too. And that it can get us through life. That's the first time decision.